ecology is the way that different species in an area rely on each other, interact with one another, compete with one another. So, for example, if we're just taking a look at a very simple illustration of different communities in an ecosystem, you have your producers like trees. There would be a lot more producers, certainly. You would have bugs that live in the trees, on the ground. You have different birds that are passing through or migrating, some that stay, some birds that are local and stay in this area. You also have different kinds of fungi and protists, and you have all different kinds of detritivores and decomposers in this ecosystem. That will include everything: bacteria, any other prokaryotes, protists, fungi, plants, animals. So anything living in the way that they rely on one another. So let's talk about predation. Predation, the definition is the act of killing and eating another animal, I should say organism, excuse me. So cows eating grass, they are predating the grass. I know it sounds weird, but they are killing and eating that organism. And then we might get to ones that we think about when we think about predation, things where you have a ferocious animal like an owl eating a mouse. But this can include also whales who filter feed and just go through the ocean like this. And they catch plankton. We talked about plankton. They are any organism in the animal who cannot fight a current, and they just swim at the top and they scoop up all of them. So predators are not always the fierce organisms like bats or owls or the great white shark. They can be any animal that is, any organism that is eating another organism. So generally, predators are a lot bigger than their prey. They could be collectively bigger. If we're thinking about, for example, wolves, that might take down a big giant elk or moose. Together, the wolves are bigger than that moose. Also, predators are generally less abundant in the ecosystem than their prey.
This way, or has perfected this method of getting back to the sea. As long as the sea lions stay well up the beach, you might think they will be safe, but the hungry whales are very daring. Several of the whales are hunting in a group. That sea lion was keeping just ahead of one of the whales, but was caught by another it probably hadn't seen.
this is interesting because hunting, we often think of there's a predator and a prey, but you can see like my example of talking about the wolves and the elk, or this example here, that you have cooperative hunting and predation happening. And to think about other species have some kind of communication between them. We often think as humans we're the only ones that have this form of communication, but other organisms do too. And not just thinking about maybe something like a group of whales who are mammals and somewhat closely related to us, but even fungi, they can communicate with chemicals as well. So there's all kinds of different forms of communication that we might always disregard because we're often taught that humans are the best communicators, but this shows other forms of communication as well.
At sea, as on land, the sun shapes life. Sunlight and nutrients form the key links in nearly every food chain in the ocean.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened to the rest of the video. This video, one of the things that happens, like, I don't know why it's cut off, but the orcas, it's the orcas and the seals, but the orcas, the killer whales, they will play with the seals. They grab them and they toss them. They play catch with the seals for a while before they eat them. It's pretty wild. Sorry, I don't know why I don't have that. So predation, when we're talking about any kind of interaction between members of different species within a community, you have those co-evolution issues that when one trait of your either predator or your prey in that interaction between the two of you, when one trait starts to become favored, it is going to put the pressure of the other species to have perhaps a different trait that was favored. And based on just those mistake mutations in a population that happen and what is favored by the environment, natural selection, it puts a pressure on other species within the community to also have changes within what traits are favored in the environment right now, including when we're talking about the environment, kind of the environment or nature or natural selection, species are agents of natural selection. It's not just the literal environment. Like today, it's very windy outside. We're not just talking about like those more abiotic factors, we're also talking about the biotic factors within environment can be agents of natural selection on a species. So in this, and we talked about a bunch of examples, that if the predators start to change in some way, it will likely favor a different trait or characteristic in the prey. And then that may favor a different trait or characteristic in the predators, and you see these changes over evolutionary time. So another example of this, hawks. If, let's say that hawks just had regular eyesight like you and I, and their prey used to be white and would stick out within green and brown grasses, and then there was a mutation that gave hawks better eyesight and they could see them even better, that any mice who were able to be colored just by a mutation, any mice that have a coloration that would blend them in better, would be not as easily seen by the good eyes of the hawk. And so now these ones that are able to blend in or camouflage better are favored, and those white mice will go away over time. So there are what we call anti-predator defenses or counteracting behaviors that the prey themselves are prone to have strategies to make them not be easily caught by their predators. So these are pretty interesting, that when we're talking about coevolution and the pressures that species exert on one another, that the prey themselves are trying to have specific kinds of behaviors, whether we're talking about the way they act, like maybe just like holding still, so that you can't see them, they blend in with their environment. That, like this mouse here, that if the hawks have really good eyesight and you can blend in, is it a good idea to move through your environment? No, right? Because then the hawks will see some kind of movement. They don't know, can't really see what it is, but something's moving. So when you have a coloration that blends you in, you are better off just being as still as possible. And that's a counteracting or anti-predator defense or behavior. The other thing is that it could be your physiology. Perhaps you have a mutation that makes you poisonous. That's a good anti-predator defense. Or it could be just like, you blend in, your internal physiology, or a combination of a behavior and the way you look, or your internal physiology. So all three of these kinds of genetic mutations, whether you're talking about how you look, how you are internally, or how you act, can be in combination ways to get away from your predator. So here's a good example of a variety of those different mutations at play together.
And this is Nicole.
Really be a victory. Let's begin with this pufferfish. Minding its own business in this calm river delta in Tanzania, Africa. Enter the predator. In this case, our river otter cousin to the Yellowstone sliders. It's trying to make an afternoon snack out of the pufferfish. How tough can it be? The otter captures the puffer and, sort of, not exactly. Okay, the truth is the puffer gulps water until it resembles a beach ball, and in the process, transforms from a tasty morsel into a major pain. No matter what the otter tries, the puffer refuses to deflate himself. Naturally, the otter appears baffled. He set out to get a fish dinner, and instead he seems to be playing a ball game. The irony here is that the puffer is protecting both of them. The puffer has a poisonous gallbladder. If the otter actually ate the puffer, they'd both die. Puff Daddy survives, and the otter goes in search of another meal it can sink its teeth into.
So it's cool because the pufferfish, I don't know if you could tell, the back side of it was kind of like brown and yellow mottled color. They could go on the bottom of the sandy floor and blend in from the top. You can't see them. The very white belly also, if something is swimming underneath them and they look up, they'll see brightness, and a white side of some kind of a fish is actually camouflaging so that underneath that you just kind of blend in with the brightness of the sky. So that's why a lot of times fish are very light on the bottom and different colored on the top. So it has that color camouflaging on the outside. It also has that behavior and physiology of being able to take in air and inflate itself. Wouldn't that be kind of wild? that if you could, like, let's say that a car accident is about to happen and your body detects that and it blows up really big and you act as your own airbag. That'd be pretty amazing, right? And then they also have poison. And so that even if the predator gets beyond the camouflage and the inflating, and then they do eat them, it's going to kill the predator. So there's all kinds of great things that are happening here with that pufferfish. Okay, another example, bats. So here's some counteracting behaviors, and let's say that we're going back and forth over time, long periods of time, as evolution would need. So bats can use sonar. Sonar is a sound wave that is called echolocation. They can send out a sound wave and then it bounces back to them and they get a picture or an image of what's out there. So they're using sound to get an actual physical image in their brain. And in nighttime, that's why bats are specialized to be active at night, because they don't need to see. Some bats are blind, they don't even have the ability to see, and many bats have very bad eyesight because they can just send out the sonar and they can see a picture in their brain differently than you see with your eyes. So the moths, they're just kind of like, okay, great, we are going to be seen even at nighttime. But the moths have developed very simple ears. There's a mutation where their ears are so fine at hearing that they can hear these sonar waves, which, we can't hear sonar. If we are watching a movie and some kind of sonar is used, usually it's like a sound effect, right? They give you a sound effect of some kind of sonar is being used. So the bats start to hear the sonar, and then they have a different flying pattern to avoid the bats. But over time, let's say that then the bats, that they change their frequency of their sonar to one that the moths can no longer hear. So now the moths are vulnerable again. And then the moths start doing this clicking. They have a mutation to be able to produce these clicks that interfere with the sonar bouncing back to the bats. So the bats can't get that clear picture in their minds anymore. And then the bats are like, wait. Okay, so if they're clicking, we can hear the click. So why don't we just turn off the sonar and we just go toward the click instead of relying on our sonar? So then the bats kind of try and outsmart the moths in that way. But you can see these back and forths of this pressure, that co-evolution between the predator and the prey. The prey have to be just as quote-unquote smart as the predator.
The frogs' mating songs also court danger. A fringe-lipped bat emerges from his shelter. The frogs are playing his favorite tune. Some frogs are poisonous, but the fringe-lipped bat comes hardwired to distinguish the call of dinner from the clamor of death. He can identify and avoid poisonous frogs just by listening to their calls. He pauses and then goes for the kill.
So the frogs got to think about, okay, mating and making those clicks to attract the mate versus the clicks attracting their predator. You've got to figure out that balance. So, as I mentioned before, when we were talking about the mice or the pufferfish, the concept of camouflage is an anti-predator device, but it's also used by predators themselves. camouflage means that you have some ability to blend in with your environment, making you essentially unseen. Let's take a look at this question. Which behavioral response to the threat of predation is most likely to be selected for in a species that uses camouflage for protection from predators? Quick escape response, sudden display to startle the predator, cooperative behavior, behavior that mimics the behavior of the predator, or motionless behavior. But, okay. So you were all listening. Here we go. So you definitely, when you can camouflage, being still is your best bet. So here's a variety of animals that use camouflage. This is a flatfish. This is the eye, or the two eyes are right here. This is the mouth right here. And then you can trace around the body like that. That they can, this is quite an intelligence. If you've ever watched videos of octopus, you can see they can change their coloration. That's pretty amazing that you can detect your environment so well that you could change your skin to blend in. Here's a frog that is kind of muddy and maybe leafy, broken down leaf colors to blend in with that environment. And then a lot of our Arctic animals, like beluga whales or the Arctic fox, there's the, is it the Arctic rabbit maybe? Arctic hare, that are polar bears too, right? They blend in with snowy colors. When there's a growing season, a short growing season in these cold areas, this coat will shed and the Arctic fox will have a white stripe down its middle and then kind of like white and brown colors so that it can blend in with the branches of bushes to hide. So it'll go back and forth, and this will be very short-lived, and I'll be back to that again when it's back to snowing. This is a flatfish that they took into a lab, and they put it on a variety of different backgrounds that the flatfish had never seen before. And even though it's not perfectly checkerboard, but that's pretty wild, right? That this flatfish, who's never seen a checkerboard pattern in its life, could just produce this coloration.
Flounder. The very word makes the fish seem helpless and confused. And that's just what they want you to think. Their thin body.
So their eyes, they start like a regular fish. You know how like a fish, their mouth is here and then they have an eye on each side of their body. They start like that. And then they, early in life, they metamorphose where one of the eyes migrates over to the other side of the body because they're going to swim this way more. And if you had an eye on the bottom part of your body, it'd just get full of sand all the time. So it's pretty wild too. All kinds of
These
creative
camouflaged scales help them look like the seabed. Once within range, they strike with sudden speed. This is a shrimp, aka dinner. The flounder hides under a thin covering of sand. Only its eyes peek out. Strangely enough, when a flounder is born, its eyes are on either side of its body. As it matures, one eye migrates to the other side, giving it the characteristic flat shape that allows it to hide so well. The shrimp senses danger, but it's too late. But the flounder's hungry movements don't go undetected. This osprey senses an easy snack. The flounder attempts to disguise itself again, but the sands are too sparse and the water too shallow. The eater is eaten, and the cycle of life continues.
So you can see, especially this flounder, using both that camouflage for predation and also for hiding from predators as a prey. So both predators and prey use camouflage. Snakes are colored to blend in with their environment. Whenever you see striping patterns or different sections of body colors that repeat, that means that you're the camouflage is working in a way that it breaks up the body pattern and it helps the animal to blend in. So a zebra, for example, even though it's pretty bright, the black and white stripes, the idea of that is that when a zebra is running away from a predator, that it will do often like zigzagging patterns, so it'll look blurry and it will be hard to see. So anytime you see stripes or spots, that will give an advantage of breaking up that body pattern. Like the cheetah also. The cheetah has dots on it, and so dots are another way to break up the body pattern, and then coloration to blend in with grasses. This is an action that helps the cheetah both as prey to hide from predators, but also to be able to kind of crouch down and be motionless and then jump out and get its prey. This is a frogfish. So here's a mouth. And this is one of the eyes, and the other eye is here. It has coloration to look like a sponge. It has all these dots on there that look kind of like the pores of a sponge. And this group of fish have a number of really outstanding characteristics. One is that they have a really huge mouth and an enormous stomach in their body. They can eat in one bite, they can eat a third of their body weight. So imagine if you ate in one bite a third of your body weight. That would be crazy. Also, they have this here, which is like a fishing lure, and they can retract it or they can put it out on their head, and they can wiggle this lure at the end while holding completely still, and fish or shrimp or whatever can come up and investigate that, and then just as something is about to go, oh, I'm gonna eat this thing, the frogfish can jump out and eat them. Even their lures, kind of interesting, different species of frogfish, their lures look different. Some of the lures look like different species of fish. They're pretty amazing. This one just looks like some kind of like a weird blob floating there. And this is a relative of the frogfish.
This is Google Pixel 9a with Gemini. It's free at Verizon with plans starting at $30 line. And this is Nicole asking, where the heck are you? And Gemini helping you respond in style Shakespeare. So get Google Pixel 9a.
Well, our next creature fits a category called survival of the fittest. It's the sargassum fish, and it's evolved itself into a perfect predator because it perfectly, and we mean perfectly, mimics the sargassum plant that gives it its name. Fish come to the sargassum plant hoping to harvest what are called hydroids. Instead, they find themselves staring into the eyeball of certain doom. Unfortunately, the fish don't pick up on this. If they did, they'd be making a hasty retreat. The sargassum fish is the big bad wolf of this part of the ocean, off Florida's coast. Here's how clever the sargassum's disguise really is. Its body doesn't just mimic the color of the clay. Those white spots in the fish even mimic the tube worms and hydroids that grow on the sargassum plant. Result? Before its prey can say, hey, I'm getting eaten by a plant. It's already been eaten by this sly predator. There's something even creepier. Its fins have evolved into prehensile fingers. The better to creep through the foliage with, as it searches for more and better prey. The sargassum fish will eat other fish almost its own size. And here's the creepiest part of all. Because of its translucent skin, you can actually watch the victim experience its death throes inside the sargassum fish.
Crazy.
The birds themselves nourish another species. Spectacled caiman wait for a meal to fall out of the sky.
Crocodiles and alligators, their coloration helps them blend in with the water, especially when the sun is hitting it. It's hard to make out their body shape, so that's their form of camouflage. Anything on the shore, they can just kind of like leap out and get their prey. There's another kind of coloration issue that is called warning coloration, epiziomatic coloration, and it is bright coloration that advertises to everybody in the community, like, don't eat me, I'm poisonous. Poison arrow frogs or dart frogs, there's a lot of different species that are really, really bright in color and super cool patterns as well. And then you have a snake like this, the coral snake, which has these bright coloration patterns on it that warn that they are poisonous.
When you think of poison, you probably think of bottles you're not supposed to touch. But in the natural world, poisons can be powerful tools used by animals that are just trying to survive. These brightly colored golden poison frogs are highly toxic. But they don't use their poison to hunt. They secrete toxins from their skin to keep away other animals that might want to eat them. Poison frogs don't try to camouflage themselves. They go out of their way to show off. Warning colors are good for the prey animal and good for the predator. Basically, bold colors and patterns tell predators to find their lunch somewhere else. Scientists call this aposematism. Yellow, red, orange, black, and white, when they're flaunted, are all warning colors. Gila monsters are pretty slow moving and might have a hard time running away from predators, but their orange and black scales advertise a venomous bite. Lionfish have pretty spectacular stripes and some toxic spines. Their bold patterns and colors warn predators that a lionfish snack comes with a painful side of venom. Come check out these show-offs in person at the museum's Power of Poison exhibition. Just don't...
These are other kinds of poison dart frogs or poison arrow frogs. They get their name poison dart or poison arrow. Indigenous populations that live in areas where these are found, they would use them. They would take the frogs and they would put them over fire to get them to sweat. And then they would wipe the poison that was sweating out of the frogs. They put it onto arrows so that when they went to hunt something larger, they'd have poison on their arrows. And even if a little small arrow didn't kill something like, let's say a cheetah or a jaguar, that poison would eventually slow that animal down and kill them so that then they could eat that big cat. And then there's also mimicry, which is a counteracting behavior, that if you could mimic, you could look like something else, it could possibly benefit you, and we'll talk about different levels of these benefits. It goes from being very, very simple to very complex. So one is the simplest example, that you're a cactus and you are colored in a way that looks like a rock. Or you're an insect and your coloration and shape looks like the spines that are on a particular plant. So here you have some of these that are the spines of the plant and some of these are insects. It's hard to tell the difference between them. As I mentioned, warning coloration or epizoomatic coloration. It says, hey, I'm poisonous, but what if you have the same coloration or very similar coloration as something that is poisonous, but you are not? Then you can just hang out in the same area where the poisonous organism is, and you also will not get eaten, because who's gonna take a chance? Like, wait, are you the poisonous one or the not poisonous one? So here's a couple of examples. One is that you have the coral snake that we saw before, and then the mountain king snake. And I know people have like ways of remembering which one's which, but let's say that you are going hiking and you see something, a snake, like let's just say this summer, you decide to go somewhere and you're in the environment of these snakes, and you see a snake that's red, yellow, and black, and you come across it and you're like, wait, would you be able to remember which one's which in that just like instant of seeing this maybe poisonous snake? No, you'd probably run away. A local example is the monarch butterfly and the viceroy. That the monarch butterfly, it grows on milkweed, and while it's growing, it eats the milkweed sap, and the milkweed sap has a poison to it. And instead of getting sick from the milkweed sap, they incorporate that poison into their body. And when they're adults, then they have a poisonous taste to them. That's one of the reasons why monarchs, if you've ever heard, they can fly from like our area all the way down to Mexico. They make their migration, and they, you know, as a butterfly who doesn't fly super fast, birds will just stay away from them and let them do their migration. The viceroy looks very similar. There's a couple of ways that you can tell the difference between them. One is the viceroy has this band of black on the front tip of the wing, whereas the monarch has these yellow spots. And then the dots go right up against the edge of the wings, the white dots, whereas they don't do that on the monarch. And then there's aggressive mimicry. So these are relatives, if you remember the frogfish, this is an aggressive form of mimicry, that it is mimicking a sponge but then can jump out and eat their prey. The anglerfish is a relative of the frogfish, and they live in very deep waters where their fishing lure, they can light this up, and then a fish will come and investigate it, and then they can jump out and grab it. This is very advanced mimicry. We have a spider, a jumping spider, and the snowberry fly. And I think you can tell the difference between the two pretty easily. Jumping spiders will do a dance when they're about to attack. So they give a little warning like, I'm going to attack you. And what the snowberry fly has figured out, that when they do their wings this way and backward, that the pattern on their wings looks kind of like the legs of the spider. Like the black would be mimicking the legs of the spider. And when they go and turn around, they do the same dance that the jumping spider does, and they can scare off predators in that way.
This episode was brought to you by Curiosity Stream. Hi, I'm Jess Keating, and this is Animal Logic's second day.
I should like to tell you that I have seen some of the experiments shown in this film. As you can imagine, technique is everything.
The natural world is filled with imposters. These animals disguise themselves to look like something they're not, yet their goals are not unified, and different species use mimicry for a variety of reasons, from defense to attack to camouflage. Mimicry has formed the basis of many of our imaginary worlds. The replicants of Blade Runner, the Cylons of Battlestar Galactica, and the shape-shifting Skrulls of Captain Marvel, to name a few. And like all good science fiction, they take inspiration from nature. In a nutshell, mimicry is an adaptation that helps an animal, the mimic, resemble something else, the model, with the intent of deceiving predators or prey. There are a few broad categories of mimicry. The first is Batesian mimicry. This is when an animal adapts to look like a more dangerous animal. This is the sheep in wolf's clothing method. Species that use Batesian mimicry generally imitate species that are aposematic, species that have evolved strong warning signals to tell predators that they're dangerous. This strategy works best when the population of models far outnumbers the mimics. Otherwise, predators wouldn't be particularly wary of their aposematic prey, whose bark turned out to be much worse than their bite. Probably the most iconic Batesian mimic is the mimic octopus.
How to use Autoport Explorer.
First, start a quote.
Then, compare rates from us and our...
Unlike many other mimics, they don't just stick to one model, and are able to copy a variety of species, usually venomous ones. They can rapidly change their body shape, pulling their arms back and swimming along the ocean floor to resemble a banded sole, a type of flatfish that has poison glands along the base of its fins. If the mimic needs to swim across the open ocean, they will display a striped pattern and hold their arms up around to resemble the venomous lionfish. And perhaps most impressively, in an act of defense, they will bury themselves, leaving just two arms exposed to resemble the highly venomous sea crate, a sea snake with enough venom to kill an adult human. In short, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a mimic octopus. Similarly, this is not a bee, it's a hoverfly. These stingless flies disguise themselves as bees in hopes of deterring predators. Also, this is not an ant, it's a mantis. These baby predators have adapted to resemble ants, which are notoriously less tasty than mantids. Likewise, this is not a snake. It's a hawk moth caterpillar. These caterpillars have adapted themselves to resemble highly venomous vipers for obvious reasons. And finally, these are not honey badgers. They're cheetah cubs. Batesian mimics are found all over the world, and they're particularly common in butterflies and moths. Many species of butterfly that are tasty to predators, like the tiger leafwing, mimic butterflies that aren't so tasty, like the famously disgusting helicones. Several species of moth will use acoustic mimicry. They will mimic the sounds of moths that are less appealing to predators, like the tiger moth. The Funamuda moth is an extraordinary case, as they're deaf but can reproduce tiger moth sounds. Cuckoos use mimicry as a core component in their parasite-host relationships. Cuckoos are brood parasites and lay their eggs in another bird's nest, tricking them into raising their young.
The famous brood parasite, the cuckoo bird, invades the nest of a pair of titlarks. The cuckoo will lay its own eggs in the nest while stealing away the titlark's eggs to eat for itself. And here come the titlarks to chase the cuckoo away, but the damage has already been done. The eggs have been swallowed. Eventually, the cuckoo eggs will hatch, and the titlarks will raise the cuckoo as their own.
They've evolved plumage that resembles sparrowhawks, and scientists have found that reed warblers, a cuckoo host species, are less likely to attack a cuckoo that more closely resembles a hawk when they first invade the nest. Likewise, several different species of spider mimic ants. Though this mimicry comes at a cost, the small ways they have to adapt to resemble ants greatly reduces how many egg sacs they can have, and thus limits their reproduction.
Having made this super nursery, the mother takes no more interest in her young, and she soon dies.
The hawk moth caterpillar isn't the only caterpillar that's pretending to be something that it's not. The eastern tiger swallowtail has false eye spots and an appendage that sticks out of them that looks like a snake sniffing the air with its tongue. It also looks identical to caterpillar. The second group of mimics are those that use Mullerian mimicry. These groups all send the same honest signals that they're dangerous. This is similar to aposematism in that many are displaying bright coloration, but the difference is that the entire group will display similar patterns, mimicking one another. This is why poisonous frogs are brightly colored and why wasps and bees share their iconic colors. This can be seen in mammals by the white and black stripes that honey badgers, skunks, and polecats share. Amsleyan mimicry is when a deadly animal mimics a less deadly animal.
And the teacher is explaining that there are two kinds of attack, with warning and without any warning.
This one is interesting because unlike other mimics, they aren't trying to look as scary as possible. They're trying to look kind of scary. If a deadly predator is so deadly that anything that attacks it will die, then the attacking predators can't learn to avoid them in the future, and other predators will continue this rate of attack. The deadly predator would thus benefit from camouflage rather than aposematism, as it would reduce the number of attacks. But in special cases, like with the Texas coral snake, they are able to imitate the similar looking but much less deadly false coral snake. This allows for predators to attack false coral snakes and not die, thus learning to avoid those types of snakes in the future and reducing the overall number of attacks on Texas coral snakes.
This is our little coral snake buddy here. I just kind of wanted to go over some of the coral snake facts that we have. He has that red on yellow pattern that everybody's talking about. Same thing with any non-venomous snakes that kind of look like coral snakes. They can also have the red and yellow pattern that the coral snake normally has.
If you're too deadly, you can't teach lessons. This leads us to aggressive mimicry. This is the wolf in sheep's clothing approach. Many of these strategies involve using lures to mimic things that their prey eats. For example, the frightening alligator snapping turtle has a tongue that resembles a worm. They'll open up the nightmare fuel that they call a mouth and wait for prey that are dumb enough to try and eat the worm that is patiently waiting for them in what must look like a cave of horrors. Then, snap.
No animal can outsmart the allure of a lure.
Perhaps the most terrifying aggressive mimic is the Iranian spider-tailed viper. They employ both a mimic lure and highly effective camouflage to hunt their prey. The tips of their tails resemble spiders, and they will sit perfectly still, flicking their tail to and fro, as if it were a spider, in hopes of tricking a passing bird. The black drongo is a small bird found in Asia that mimics the alarm calls of several species, including the meerkat. Hearing these false alarm warnings, the meerkats will abandon whatever they just caught to flee for safety, leaving the meal all to the drongo. Finally, we come to what might be the most beautiful of all the mimics, the orchid mantis. These gorgeous mantises have evolved to be almost indistinguishable from orchids. They use this camouflage when hunting. They'll climb up an orchid and stand next to it. When a flower-seeking fly comes by for a snack, the mantis strikes. Looks really do kill. The orchid mantis is just one in an amazing order of highly camouflaged ambush hunters. One of the coolest is the dead leaf mantis. If you want to learn more about this amazing insect, then you should watch The Prey, which is streaming right now on Curiosity Stream.
I got this wow skin from Olay Body Wash. It's new super serum. See?
This is called startle coloration. The animal displays some big spots on the body in places that are more expendable than like the brain-like area or the main nervous system area. Here with the peacock moth, the major part of the nervous system is here in the head. They have evolved to have two large spots on their back wings so that if something, it does a couple of things. One is that if, let's say a bird is flying overhead, it thinks that two large eyes are looking up at the bird. And the bird's like, oh, that thing looks too big to attack. The other thing is that if something does try and attack this and thinks this is the head area and they bite one of the back wings, the moth can still fly away using the front wings. The back wings are not as important as these front wings, nor getting your head bit. The swallowtail butterfly has these eye spots on the tail end for the larva here, the swallowtail butterfly larva. If you got your back end bit off, would not, again, be as harmful as getting your head bit off. Some animals use chemical warfare, like venom, poison, and then we'll have a video that will talk about this. Bombardier beetle has a really amazing strategy. The octopus group will release octopus, squids, cuttlefish. They have ink that they can release, and so if something tries to go for them, they release some ink, and then the ink spreads out like a big cloud, a dark cloud, and then they can shoot away behind that dark cloud. So there's lots of ways that chemicals can be utilized.
An oogpster beetle in South Africa. He hunts ants. Eating ants may give him more than just nourishment. He may get something else from them that helps him fight his enemies. The ants launch a counterattack and nip his ankles, but he simply kicks them out of the way. The valiant ants drive him off, straight into real danger. A mongoose. It's inquisitive, but it's also wary of the oogpster. A black and white pattern is a warning signal. The beetle takes aim and fires formic acid straight at the mongoose's eyes and mouth. The beetle probably collected this acid from the ants. It certainly makes the beetle itself very distasteful, and that, in turn, makes it worth mimicking. This defenseless little lizard carries the beetle's warning pattern. It also imitates the way the beetle runs. particularly well, it's true, but well enough to fool predators into thinking it just might be an acid-firing beetle. All kinds of insects have developed chemical weapons. A pair of devil riders stick insects. They fire bitter-tasting oils, terpenes. European wood ants under attack from a hungry crow. They fire the sort of acid that gives nettles their sting. So this is like one of us falling into a nettle patch. But the master of chemical warfare is the bombardier beetle. It can create a chemical reaction within its body so violent that boiling caustic liquid explodes out of its abdomen. By pulsing the jet 500 times a second, it keeps its rear end just cool enough to prevent it being cooked.
The bombardier beetle has different glands that hold different chemicals, and when it goes to spray, they all combine together to make that hot, it's like boiling, poisonous liquid. Isn't that amazing? It's so crazy that it's like right there in their abdomen, and then when they need it, it all combines together just like a chemistry experiment. And then here's a couple of examples of the octopus that this silly diver here was messing with this octopus. The octopus releases all this ink so it gets all cloudy. There's different colors of ink, like this one here is a little more green. And it just creates basically a smoke screen in the water.
Hey Bella, can I get some discussion starters for Moby Dick? Here are some topics: revenge and morality.
Why we shouldn't touch animals? We should look at them. You can see how it gets really cloudy there. Just to give you an idea of how that is. It might not seem like it's such a great strategy, but it works really well. And then as I mentioned before, herbivores are also considered predators because the definition of predation is the act of killing and eating other animals. So plants have had mutations or adaptations to allow for their survival. Milkweed plants, so that's your next blank here, milkweed. And as I mentioned before, with the monarch butterflies, the milkweed plants that the caterpillars eat, they incorporate that poison into their body. These are the milkweed caterpillars. You'll see them in about a month. In the next month, the caterpillars are really cool. Milkweeds are usually pinks and purples. They have really thick leaves that if you break the leaf, this white milky stuff comes out of it. So if you ever mess around with a milkweed plant, we've got them in our front of our house to attract pollinators and to help grow the monarch caterpillars. If you get that sap on your hands, it can be like really irritating to you, so you should wipe your hands off. Cactus spines are another example.
The Venus flytrap. Like the sundew, it makes itself very attractive, oozing nectar across the brim of each leaf. But any visiting insect had better watch out for these 6 tiny hairs. This fly has to tread carefully. If it strikes one hair, it can carry on feeding, but a timer has been set. A second strike in less than 20 seconds, and the fly is doomed. An electrical impulse is triggered, and the leaf snaps shut in just a fraction of a second. The tips lock together like prison bars. If the fly is very big or very small, it may just manage to escape. But most are trapped and die.
Pretty amazing that they have cells that are like neurons, right? So kind of some of these things that you think, oh, plants, they probably don't have a nervous system or systems like we have, but we do see often similarities.
A pitcher plant. In Borneo's poor soil, it gets most of its nourishment from insects, lured to nectar glands under its lids. The sides of the pitcher are so waxy, few intruders escape. A watery grave awaits. At the bottom, glands secrete enzymes that help digest the corpses and feed the plant. This fate isn't shared by all visitors. Crab spider spends its entire life in the pitcher, hanging on with threads of silk. Instead of building a web, it lets the pitcher trap its food. The spider just waits for its meal to drown, then goes fishing. Alive, this ant would be too dangerous for the spider to tackle. The pitcher helps it snag bigger meals. The spider leaves something for its host. The digested remains of its meal will end up in the water and feed the plant.
This Pedersen shrimp, waving its white antennae, is issuing an invitation and is accepted by a Nassau grouper. Cleaning is a striking example of symbiotic behavior. As a result of its service, the cleaner is fed, and the fish that is cleaned is healthier as a result.
All right, let's stop there. We are going to go outside. We'll meet in lab. You can leave your stuff in the lab room, and I'm going to lock the door so you don't have to bring your stuff out with you. And we'll have to do a couple things when we're out there, so make sure everybody has the right supplies.